I mean, we could just jump in there. I suppose we should probably just do like a general intro here,
do your
right?
little intro and we'll get rolling.
So, Wave Theory, Sine Craft, MrAyrit here. We haven't done a podcast in a long time. I think we've all just been busy, and these usually take about an hour, so we just haven't done it. So today's episode, we're happy to all be back together, and we are going to discuss 2022 and kind of just like takeaways for us, things we enjoyed, things that were memorable to us, things that maybe we're looking forward to in the future here going forward. So I don't know if you guys have a particular topic you guys want to jump in on first, or what do we think?
I mean, can I just say thanks to all the viewers, because 2022 was my first full calendar year doing this YouTube thing, and there was a lot of channel growth and a lot of support out there amongst the viewership. So I just want to say thank you to all of the viewers and subscribers and all of that. It's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like for me, as I was looking back through all my videos, I was like, wow, this was like, I mean, some of it seems ages ago, but really this last year, I feel like is really, I don't know, where it feels like an actual channel where I'm doing things consistently, and I got to do all the flagships and stuff like that. So it feels like a memorable year.
Gotta do the flagships. I'm hearing the tiny violins.
Was it got to or gotta?
Yeah,
got to like get to like I get to like I feel fortunate, like I'm grateful.
There you go.
Oh, what a year!
Not like a boo-boo for me.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. It's been a fun year, and I think for a lot of us, probably we all decided to sort of dig in early COVID times to like keep some sanity. At least I did. I won't speak for y'all, and there was a bit of a pause there, I think, in sort of manufacturing, and everyone was sort of pulled back and not sure what was going to happen, and there's a lot of trepidation. And then I feel like this year, like everything kind of started to bloom again. Things came back into life, and there was just so much movement in the industry, so much energy, and so it was an exciting time. A lot of cool stuff came out, a lot of interesting gear and interesting conversations around the hobby. So it was fun. It's a great year.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like there's been a lot of updates, like new flagships this year. Like I've got the new Utopia right now. I mean, Caldera came out. We've got the Diana TC. So like a lot of like kind of
Expanse.
That one came out too. Expanse. So like a lot of kind of updates, a lot of like new flagships, it seems like. Did you guys, any of those make a super strong impression on you guys? Or do you feel like we're just kind of at a point now where like even the old flagships are really awesome, so these new ones like maybe don't make as much waves as they used to? Or
I did like the new Utopia. I thought it was a small step forward, but a step forward nonetheless over the original in terms of its overall technical package. Now, that doesn't mean everyone out there has to like it more than the original. Okay. But I do think that it stepped forward a little bit in terms of resolution and the coherence and accuracy of its, staging and imaging and all of that kind of thing. And it is also a little bit less bright. Like it's got a warmer signature to it. So it's probably going to be a little less fatiguing for some folks. But even with that, like, I mean, I still think Susvara is top dog, at least amongst non-estats anyway. Planars and dynamics. I haven't heard anything yet that has knocked that one from the pedestal of the all-around king right now.
Which is something to say, because as far as how old now?
2017,
6 years,
I think.
6 years?
Yeah, like 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's aging. It's amazing. Like that's what's sort of shocking. Like, I mean, with all the R&D effort that's being thrown at finding a new path forward. And of course, preference is always a factor, right? There are people who I know that have been, lived the Susvara life and then like pivoted to the Utopia and been like, actually with the right amp and the right chain, like I like the Utopia better than the Susvara. And so like personal preference is always going to be a factor. We can't say anything's the best, but like it's kind of hard to believe in that price category that something hasn't, for me, unseated the this as far as still.
Well,
That's
and
true.
I mean,
Yeah.
and maybe it never will, right? When you talk just preferences coming into play and things like that. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, what I feel like maybe one of my big takeaways was from the year is just how much I feel like I'm really coming into my own preference, and I'm not, I think I'm listening much more for enjoyment. And I think maybe that's because I have heard so many of these really nice headphones, and I'm going, it's some of them are really impressive, but I don't really like listening to them all that much, and just thinking about that. And that's like, I just feel like there's maybe value is one of the big things I took away from this year, of just like how much you can get now for value, especially even if you're talking old flagships, right? Since these new models are coming out on the used market, like a lot of these things are coming down into kind of somewhat attainable, areas.
Yeah, original Utopia is like, 2,300-ish, 2,500-ish on the reused market now. And that is a lot of headphone for that money. Like a lot of headphone.
And a lot of money for that headphone. No, I mean it's both ways, right? I think we've all like
Yeah.
gotten a drink from the golden goblet, and so it's like a little easy to lose perspective. But yeah, I'm actually curious what y'all think. Like, I think we teased this when we were talking before, but sort of like bang for the buck, and I don't necessarily have a price point on that, but like, what's something you heard this last year where you're like, for that money, whether that was $10,000 or $100, like for that money, that thing is punching way above its weight. I'm curious if there was anything that really stuck with you as like great value for dollar.
I've got one that's been brand new to me, and this is IEMs, like super cheap IEMs. I feel like I've tried a handful of like under 20, under $30 IEMs this year that I think are absolutely like phenomenal for the price. So specifically the 7 hertz Saltone Zeros. Like I just did a video on that maybe like last week, but like that IEM shocked me with how good it was for like $15. And I'm like, good audio is affordable. Like you don't have to spend thousands of dollars. Like you can spend like literally like $15 and like you're doing pretty good. I mean,
That's awesome.
so that was one. I have the DX1 right now, which is Topping's new little like DAC amp, which is like $100. It's just like a little cute form factor. And I think for like a toping product, if you're just wanting super clean, like that's a tremendous value, I feel like. And then the 8XX was another one for me that I, for like $650, I feel like is kind of a screamer of a deal as far as like just what it can do and what it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's like for everybody, but just for what you get for the dollar, I think it's hard to beat.
Yeah.
So those were a handful of mine.
So I'll throw out that like when Adorama drops the prices on like the Elegia and the HE6
Yeah.
SEV2 like they've been doing, like
$400 for that, for the HE6.
yeah, I think it's like $400 for either of them,
Yeah.
380, $400. Like those are like, if you can get either of those headphones for that money, that's virtually impossible to beat
For brand new,
for brand
Yeah.
new in the box, performance per dollar. Those are two ridiculous values. But I mean, that's almost cheating, I think, in answering that question when you're talking about a 70% sale or something like that. But the one that I was going to bring up, and I know MrAyrit disagrees with this one, but it was the HiFiMan EF400 DAC amp. I was pretty blown away by the price performance ratio of that thing. Now its build is a little cheap. And that tells me that, they spent a lot of the money on the guts of it rather than the bells and whistles and stuff. But just the size of the stage, the amount of resolution, the holographicness of the spatial presentation, and just the oomph of that amplifier. The amplifier in it being able to control, say, that HE6 SEV2 or even SUS, like, two of the hardest driving headphones out there. It handled expanse well, and that's quite a load. That one really impressed me. That was one of the cheaper pieces of gear I've heard in a while that made me forget to review things and just had me listening to the music when I had it. So
Really, man, that's interesting
Yeah.
to me. That is really interesting that you pull that out. I'm not going to say too many bad things about it. I didn't like it, but you know, to each their own.
To each their own. Yep.
I love that criteria though. Just like I stopped reviewing stuff, I just started listening to music again. Like that's high praise, right? That what's the MSRP on that thing? I don't even know.
It's
Usually-
$500 now.
Yeah, usually it's at 600 and it's been on sale during the holidays for 500.
Nice. Yeah, I do. I mean, the HE6 SE V2, add more letters and numbers as you want. For $400 is like, that's insane. Like that, like I've listened to that against the sus like back to back, and like there's a gap.
Oh
But
yeah.
the gap's not huge. It's not as big as the dollars. And like if somebody wanted like that, the taste of hi-fi, like some of that like crazy resolution, some of that crispy edge detail, some of that stuff that you only hear in like big boy headphones. That's a smoking deal. But you got to drive it, and it's a pain in the ass to drive. Like you can drive it, like anything will drive it. This is like always the like debate where people are like, oh, I plug my Susvara into my MacBook, it drives it fine. It's like, but it also sounds really terrible.
I was talking about this with some friends recently too, and like the tricky part with the Susvara is it is really hard to drive in terms of realizing its potential. The tricky part about that headphone is it almost never sounds bad, and that's like it is remarkably forgiving for being as resolving as it is. So when you underpower it, it still sounds sweet and pleasant and all that, but you miss out on like the coherence and the exacting nature of its spatial presentation. You don't get the slam or like the deep bass rumble and all of that, but it avoids being really peaky and sharp like other flagships do when they're under power, like the Utopia, for example.
Okay.
That one's a little weird because it's a dynamic and it's like nominally 80 ohms, but around 60 hertz or something like that, it spikes to 300 ohms. So if you underpower that one, it just sounds awful. And I think that's one of the reasons why it got some mixed reviews early on, is like it's super source picky, and if you underpower it, it sounds bad. Yeah. Sus is confusing the other way because it always sounds good. It just goes from being good to being mind-blowingly great, the more you scale up with the source gear.
Yeah. Well, speaking of source gear, I would say my dollar, value per dollar winner is not a cheap one, but I think in the class it plays, it is still an exceeding value, and that's the Denafrips Pontus 2, which is a hugely expensive DAC at $1,700, like not a cheap piece of gear. But I've listened to a lot of DACs now, from $50 up to $12,000, and I can tell you that what that DAC does for the money, like that's about the sweet spot. Like that, if you look at the law of diminishing return curve, that's the peak. And after that, like each dollar you spend gets you less and less and less and less. And so that's why I think dollar per value, if you're like, I've wanted to own a DAC that is going to be the DAC, that is the DAC to beat all DACs, I would go there and I would stop. I'm not saying there aren't better DACs, there are better DACs, but like each dollar you spend up until that point kind of makes sense, and each dollar you spend after that point is very hard to rationalize. So that's the one that I come back to. It's not the DAC I stopped at. I've like I said, I've heard other DACs. I like other DACs, but I think that's the sweet spot in terms of, for me, like taste again, playing in. Like I like the R2R DAC sound. I like that sort of like smooth but detailed sort of natural presentation. And I think that thing's just a beast and very available in the used market, holds its value, very easy to resell, which is always a thing I think about.
All that Denafrips stuff seems to hold its value like extremely well.
So
they do seem hard to get a hands on, which is probably why the value stays up.
Yeah,
I'm sure those two things are related somehow. I'm not an economist.
It's the old supply and demand. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like they come down, it's like you drive it off the lot, 30%, deal with it. But after that, they kind of settle, and even a couple owners in that, and so I don't know. For me, like having driven myself crazy in DAC land for a while, I would say like that's kind of the sweet point. If you're like getting this crazy in the hobby that like a $1,600 DAC doesn't sound stupid to you. If that just sounds stupid, if you're like, dude, that's stupid, then don't even bother. Like, ignore me and move on. But
I haven't heard one of those
like,
yet. I would like to.
If you're in there going like, oh, like Hollow Spring, like Aries, like if you're kind of flirting in that territory, like just do that and don't think about it too hard, and you're at the right spot. That's the sweet spot for sure.
I would say I'd jump in here for another one that I need to mention for sure is if that does sound stupid to you, the Cayin RU6 I have loved this year for $200 for if you just want to try out some R2R, like that's been one that I've really enjoyed and I'm still using on a daily basis right now.
Nice.
So I actually like, I feel like I'm on the upswing or the downswing right now where like I listened to and bought a bunch of really expensive stuff. And then now I'm kind of like, okay, what can I get away with and go cheaper on? And the Cayin RU6 is one of the things where I'm like, this stack is good enough that I have, downgraded my DAC to use it. But again, that I've got other considerations going on in my life.
I think that's actually a fun exercise though, is like trying to like get dollars out of this. Like it's the reverse curve of the law of diminishing returns, where it's the maximizing of returns. Where
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
How many dollars can I pull out of my system and still feel satisfied with what I'm hearing after having heard crazy good stuff? I think that's actually a great exercise and a kind of fun gamification of this.
And
whole
that's
hobby.
I feel like that's kind of what I'm in the middle of right now. Like I don't feel like I'm there quite yet, but like that's kind of like that's just the game I'm playing with myself right now.
I'll say the other like takeaway for me this year was just a like solid reminder of how important the electronics are behind your headphone or your speaker.
Absolutely.
Like I've been spending a lot more time with my speakers again this year, and like you think a headphone or a speaker can do one thing. You think you've heard what it can do, and then you like introduce a different amp in front of it. Maybe to a certain degree the DAC, but really like you think you know a headphone or a speaker, and then you change what's powering it, and you're like, oh dang, like that is a different level of what this thing can perform at. And so I've just been reminded of that, of like I always thought like, think very heavily about your endpoint, your speakers, your headphones, because that's sort of like going to define a lot of your system, and you're working backwards from there. But I've just had a handful of experiences this year where I was reminded of like how like headphones that you thought were like pretty good, or speakers that you thought were like pretty great, and then you like gave them the right juice, and you're like, oh dang. So anyway, that just like sunk in again this year.
In synergies, right? I mean, that's been something that it's easy to scoff at if you haven't really delved into like trying to dial in a certain piece of gear, but after,
or if you're just looking at graphs,
or if you're just looking at any of that stuff, but like, boy, I feel like both with speakers, because I've kind of revamped like a lot of my systems this year, speakers, and a couple different speaker setups and headphones. I've leaned heavily into tubes at this point, which I hadn't before. And boy, I feel like again, if you're willing to play around and mess with synergies, again, I think that's a way you can get value back out, right? Like if you find the right setup, like, and it doesn't all have to be expensive, but like if you play around with, I would say this for every piece of gear in your chain, buy 2 or 3 of them, test them all out, and then pick the one you like. And then, keep doing that with different pieces in your chain, as opposed to just buying one thing and trying to like decide if you like it or not. Again, that's a used market thing. And maybe like a lot of people can't or don't want to go through all that, but I feel like that's really how you dial in your setups.
I'm curious what surprised you this year? Was there anything like you heard or you trend wise you saw in the industry, or like was there any just sort of thing where you're like didn't see that coming? I'll throw one out while you guys are.
Yeah,
go ahead.
and this might have actually started technically in 21, so forgive, like it's all a blur since the pandemic and having a kid, but Odyssey like really threw me a handful of curveballs. Like the LCD-R was like nutty, and I was like, I love you guys for this. This is crazy.
Yeah, that was good.
Coming out with the carbon, like coming out with an E-stat, like Odyssey out of nowhere, like, oh, we do E-stats now. And then the LCD5. I don't like. I don't actually really like the LCD5, and for me, it like drifted away from the Odyssey promise, and I was like, for me, there was like a brand promise in the LCD series that I was like, this is not bad. That's not to say it's a bad headphone. It's just not for me personally. I was like, I had locked Odyssey into something in my mind, and then they like, pulled a switcheroo on me and did something very like with a different signature and a different form factor. And I was just, it was too many changes at once for me. So maybe that's maybe I'm too old. But like the carbon is great and like competes with a lot of like very, very high end D stats, and their first D stat out of the gate. And you're like, oh, this thing's like competing with some of the best stacks out there. So, kudos. And then the LCD-R, I just loved like just doing that, just being like, yeah, we're going to take this thing and put it out in this tiny batch, and we're going to like push a novel technology for us. I don't know. The fact that like that company and like looking at its history, and then they just went bananas in like the past, maybe it was, like I said, maybe it was a little more than a year, past 18 months, and just brought to market so many totally different things from what their path had been to that point. Like that one really like threw me for a loop, good and bad in so many ways.
I'm thinking about, I don't feel like I have anything that really surprised me, and maybe I just haven't been tracking, the industry all that long, but I guess I don't feel really surprised. I feel like my big surprise of the year is just that I was fortunate enough to try all this really high-end gear, and now I kind of feel like that thirst was quenched, and like I'm not lusting after expensive stuff at this point. You know what I mean? Like I feel pretty content with like what I've got, and um I don't know. So I think maybe that's the biggest surprise is like I don't feel like I'm chasing anything anymore. I'm just more like I'm really getting more in the mindset of just enjoying, what I have, and actually enjoying trying new things, and not just pushing to try new things. But like, I don't know. That's where I'm at. So I think it's more of like, for me, is more of a mindset thing than any specific piece of gear.
You never thought your thirst would be quenched.
No, I didn't. And now I'm sitting here going, I'm
Right.
just content. Like I'm just content, and it feels good.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying on that. I keep asking myself, am I content? And the thing is I don't really have any time to stop and think about that, because like, I mean, this is a good problem to have for my channel, but it's like I get so much stuff in all of the time, and I'm hearing so many different things in fairly rapid succession that I haven't really even had a whole lot of time to just sit down and think of like, well, what is my stuff anymore? And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy what I'm doing, and I certainly still enjoy the music and all of that, but it's just like, just because I've taken my listening in a different direction than it used to be, the question of my own contentment and happiness, this sounds worse than it feels. Just as kind of taking a back seat, right? Um yeah, so like, okay, I don't really like, just as an example, and I'm not naming any particular piece of gear here, but it's just like, okay, if I don't really like this setup as it is right now, just okay, it's going to be different 2 weeks from now. So yeah, that
Well, and
I don't know if
what
that's
a
surprise or
privilege,
not. Yeah, it's definitely a privilege.
what a privilege to have so much gear coming through that like you don't have to buy stuff. I mean, that's definitely I'm certain that that's part of what, why my thirst is quenched, is because like stuff's just coming to me and I don't have to pay for it all the time, and I get to try it out. And
Right,
like,
right.
what a better situation could you be as an audiophile if people just send you like really awesome stuff that you get to try a little bit, and then you don't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing.
So what do you all like? Your year's winding down. Another bright, shiny new year around the corner.
Hopefully shiny. We've had some new years recently that haven't gone so great. So here's hoping it's better in 23.
That's fair.
I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
A new potentially shiny or tarnished year ahead.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious if there are things you guys are hopeful for in the hobby, or things you're like, you want to Babe Ruth it, you want to like throw a prediction out there, like anything you are anticipating or hoping for or looking forward to in terms of just either your gear, your listening experience, just anything you're sort of picturing in your mind's eye as you head into the new year about what would be sweet.
Well, I can tell you one thing just that I've been enjoying lately is I just tried out some of the JM audio stuff, which, is a modifier. Like he's been modifying some headphones and things like that. And then of course, I got my T60 Argons this year, and I've been talking with Ryan, at Mod House a little bit here. And both those guys I know are like launching like actual headphones, like not modded headphones, but like their own headphones.
Yeah. They're no longer a cover band. They're writing original stuff now.
And I just think that's really cool because, I'm getting to try out some of that stuff, and it's just interesting to me listening to those guys talk about how they've progressed and how they got to this point, and what they hope is going to happen for their companies and things like that. So that's just been really cool for me. So I guess maybe for next year's, I hope I get to continue to be a part of some of that, and then hopefully be a part of some more of that in the industry, where people that maybe aren't as well known or aren't the big dogs, are reaching out and sending some stuff to try out and get some feedback on and get some exposure. And I just think that's pretty cool. Like that's an opportunity that is pretty unique, and I feel grateful to have some of those opportunities to get some of that insider stuff and be able to talk to some of those people. So that's been really fulfilling for me, and I hope that continues.
Yep. I agree. I'm rooting for both of those guys and people like them, because I think having people like them in our hobby is good for the hobby, right? It's so best to you both, John and Ryan. Keep doing what you're doing.
Well, and and we've seen, I think that's another cool thing, is like we've seen several companies that are becoming very prominent in the headphone industry that were just guys that started like that, like just started modding a few headphones, and then it took off. And they got, exactly. Dan Clark, CMF. And so I just think that's really cool, and plus some of the amp builders, that it seems like, I know like the amp that I landed on now, which is my Quicksilver, right? That's kind of just like it's not like a one-man business, but it's a small business, and, it's not a huge, giant factory pumping these things out, but they're more kind of bespoke, interesting pieces. And I appreciate that this hobby has room for that kind of thing to compete at a reasonable level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that's really kind of fundamental to the audiophile, the hobbyist audiophile, right? We're not professionals. We're not using this gear to produce music or, television and film. Like there's sort of two sides of the like high-end audio industry, right? And there are people who are like using this to for their livelihood, and then there's people like us who are using it to find enjoyment through the reproduction of music. And if you trace like hi-fi, back to its roots, like it was very hobbyist. It was like all these like kit amps that you would, order in and do all the soldering and put them together. And so like this idea that, I'm a big Deckware fan. Like that's just a guy and a couple of folks that support him, right? And like I love these little sub brands that are small crews of people that are using like, in many cases, very old school manufacturing techniques, because that's all that's sort of accessible at small scale to produce products that they're very passionate about. I don't know. I think I really enjoy following those stories, following those folks. And I think it's very cool that like there is room for small producers, whether they're making little tube amps or, 50 unit production runs of headphones. There's this guy in Hong Kong that makes the ES1A E-Stats, this guy Benson, I think his name is. Like I love all those little stories and finding these people who have like really put so much love and energy into like figuring out how to make a thing, because they love it. Like most of these folks like, do not have grand ambitions of becoming rich and famous from this pursuit, because like if they did, they're delusional. It's super, super hard to get from like tinkering on something in your garage to like, but like I think Zach's a great story. Like Zach's done really well. Like ZMF is a very, very solid player, in this industry. It's like you ask somebody who bought a pair of like, Bose noise canceling headphones at Best Buy if they know what ZMF is, and they're going to say no. But if you ask anyone on, headfi.com or like anyone who's like in more of the audiophile part of that world, absolutely, that's a brand name player. So yeah, I'm with you guys. That always energizes me to hear these cool stories, to find these like small boutique company people and products, and really dig in and get to hear a listen of something that's special and unique.
Well, and you actually get to have an interaction with those people, like in a lot of cases, and not just us, because we review a few things here or there. I mean, it's not like any of us are huge famous people, but yet we still get to sit down and talk to some of these, some of these people that are producing these things, and probably even just the average consumer that buys their product gets an opportunity to interact with them and talk about different aspects of it and stuff like that. So I just have really appreciated that this year. That's been pretty cool, and I think is a thing that's probably pretty unique to this hobby, like as opposed to like a lot of other things where that's centered around buying stuff anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it harkens back to a day gone by, right? It's like, to call Steve at Deckware and be like, hey, I want to send my amp in. I like got a little buzz in this channel, and like while it's there, like if you recommend any upgrades, to like, or call Benson from ES Labs and be like, hey man, like I don't really like the way the headband feels. Doesn't quite have a good enough clamp. Can we like work on like producing a new, like, you just call Sony.
Yeah.
Call Bose and be like, oh hey, would you guys mind sending me out a new cable? Because like forget about it. So yeah, it's a very unique sort of co-creation experience that it just can't be had at scale.
So those are all interesting points, and I agree. I think there's also another side to this coin that is going to continue to grow through 2023 too, and that's going to, like, we've been like the audiophile space has been flooded with, I mean, measurement chasers, really. I mean, that's what it's come down to. Like that segment of the market, particularly on the headphone side, has really exploded in the last handful of years too. And I don't think that's going to slow down anymore either. And so one of the things that I will be watching with curiosity through 2023 is like what the two respective communities that you guys are, or that we're talking about here. We've got like the small, it's the experience that we're chasing kind of side of it. And then there is the, we're going for what we understand to be perfection. Okay. Pursuit on the other side. So like, a prediction for 2023, Topping's going to come out with a handful of amps that continue to measure basically perfectly, sound pretty much the same as each other, and are just a little bit better than what they've done before, but not great.
There's going to be 10 zeros behind that decimal point for the THD level.
And they're going to say, we've decreased the distortion by an order of magnitude. And it's like you went from 0.0001 to 0.00001. I think I put an extra zero in there. I'm just doing this verbally off the cuff. But, and pat themselves on the back as if they've done something spectacular. And so like, and then, there's going to be a fan base out there that cheers that on too. Right. So what's going to happen? Yeah. Like, so how is the audiophile hobby going to go on this? Are we going to continue to polarize on that issue? Are we ever going to start talking to each other? I don't know. Like, it is in a lot of ways a microcosm of our world at large, where we've drawn battle lines and we've picked our sides and kind of stick to them, it seems. So
I don't know.
I'll be watching.
I see a little more of a gradation, a little more of a continuum between the like hardcore speeds and
Okay.
feeds chasers and the like purely it makes me feel warm and fuzzy folks. Like I think there's a gradation in there of folks that sort of bridge those camps a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate your point, and I think that there are a few sides of this hobby for sure. Folks that like are shooting for and again, if you look back at hi-fi, right, it's about high fidelity reproduction, right, and chasing that perfect fidelity of the recording versus like I want to listen to this and I want it to like make me feel something. Like two camps, both true.
Mhm.
Fine. I mean, you know, like I think there's room. I think there's room under the tent for different sides of this hobby. People who want to be a little more technical, people who want to be a little more just emotionally connected to it. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think that intersection of art and technology, which is this hobby, right, is always going to invite in, you know, people coming from these two perspectives. And some people, I think I'd raise my hand and say I'm sort of in between these perspectives. Like I love the gear, I love the tech, I love the technology. But at the end of the day, I think I'm really in it for getting that gut level reaction to what I'm hearing. And that's probably always going to win. Although there's definitely days when I'm nerding out and just like, oh, this is perfect silver interconnects, you know, and I try to embrace both sides of it, not like judge myself on either side too harshly.
I think one thing that I think is happening or seems to be happening, I mean, you guys correct me if you have a different perspective on it, is I feel like the consumer level stuff is getting much better compared to what it used to be. Like, I feel like most of the top players at this point, if you're talking like AirPods, you know, the Sony stuff, Bose stuff, I mean, you know, I think that if all that stuff would have been that good when I first started getting into headphones and things, I don't know if I would have delved as deeply into it as I have now. Like, I feel like with EQs and stuff like that, I feel like a lot of those things are, I think consumers are getting pretty good audio at this point in time without having to delve into really specialized products. Do you guys, I mean, I've tested some Bluetooth headphones and stuff lately that I feel like are pretty good and aren't that expensive and things. And I'm like, I feel like things are moving in a good direction, you
Yeah.
know, in that regard.
I still keep a set of XM3s around. They have their place for sure. When I'm out mowing the lawn or this time of year running the snowblower, you know, like they could really be helpful in those situations. No. Yeah. That's an interesting point. And a friend shared with me sometime this year, I don't remember how long ago, a podcast where the CEO of Amazon Music was a guest and just talking about how he sees the current state of the market for streaming audio and where he thinks it's going to go and that sort of thing. And Drew, your point about the consumer level audio getting a lot better is this CEO, and I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but I'm sure it's easy to look up, said something to the effect of like sound quality took a hit for the sake of convenience for several years,
Mm-hmm.
right? MP3, you had the iPod,
128 kilobit.
hundreds,
Yeah.
yeah, all of
Yep.
that kind of stuff. Like it was necessary. Like we reached a level of miniaturization with the tech, but like the memory wasn't there, and battery life and bandwidth and like all of those kinds of stuff were a lot more limiting. We still have a battery life problem. Like batteries is one of those things that is not advanced as much as our other tech, but that's a discussion for another day. Okay. The point he was making is like here in the third decade of this century now, like we are way past the point where quality has to be sacrificed for convenience. And he said very clearly that we have the storage capacity, we have the bandwidth, like we have all of those things. We are way past time for quality to catch up to the convenience. And I thought that was interesting. And so, like, your point about consumer audio getting better is like that might be a thing to watch for, you know, going forward. Because, I mean, let's face it, if Amazon decides they're going to push something forward, things are going to get pushed forward, right? Like, they have that kind of clout. So, I guess, like, was it this year or last year? I don't know, where Apple Music went to
I don't
lossless
know. It
to
wasn't.
audio.
It would
It's
have been about
relatively
the year
recent.
mark, wouldn't it? It would have been about the year mark.
Yeah, pretty close. I mean, I know Amazon went lossless a couple of years ago, I want to say. Spotify keeps saying they're going to do it and haven't done it yet, but are working on it. But it's happening. That was another point that Amazon Music CEO made, is like they had to go lossless before they brought the tech out to, at the consumer level, to really appreciate the advantages of lossless. Because if the tech came first and there was still lossy audio, not going to hear a difference and it's not going to matter. So, like, that's kind of like an HD TV thing. If you remember the early days of high definition TV, it's like there was somewhat limited content. So even though you could really see a difference, it still took a while for it to catch on. And so I think they kind of learned from that experience, or the tech industry did. And they're like, well, we need to make sure the content is available first, and
Well,
then
and
we'll
that,
bring out the hardware. And
and
so,
I mean, it
yeah.
really makes sense though that the audio would follow that suit, because I mean, look at like 4K TVs and things like that, like,
Mhm.
and how that's evolved. And the original TVs were super expensive and yada yada. Now you can buy a 70-inch 4K TV for like $300, and you know what I mean. And then I think like the new consoles, right, are all 4K and things like that, and you can buy, like a new Xbox for like $200, like a Series S, and you get most of that. Like there's this really nice, like, sweet spot of you can get a whole lot for not a ton of money, and you're getting like the majority of that experience. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like audio is really getting there, where like a lot of the cheap stuff sounds really, really good. Really, really good. At least I feel like that's almost my biggest takeaway from the year, really.
How many people are going to appreciate that though? Because that's another sticking point with audio and music, is that yes, we sacrificed some quality to get the convenience, but most people never noticed, right? Like
No, that's
it
true.
just, and so yeah, that's another thing. It's like, obviously the three of us and the people who are listening to us are, tend to be either a little bit nuts in the audio game, or, are just loved ones of us who listen to what we do anyway. And, I don't, so yes, consumer audio is getting better. What is the critical point of that, where they're gonna, at some point they're gonna saturate the market where just people don't care anymore? Maybe. Where is that point for audio? Video seems like it's been a little bit higher because there was 4K, now they're pushing 8K, and and people are buying it, and they can see it, right? Hearing it seems a bit different.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we're I guess maybe part of my argument is maybe we're already there, where like the consumer stuff is good enough that most people aren't going to feel the need to delve any deeper, except those that are neurotic, like the people that are listening to this. So
Wow.
I think better is like the big
Yeah.
the big word to underline. Like, what does better mean? And I think for the average consumer of audio and video tech, there are a couple clear benchmarks, right? And like SD to HD and HD to 4K, like those are pretty big leaps, and you can really you can see them. And we are visual beasts. We're like pretty good with our eyes of like parsing out information. And
Yep.
in audio, like certainly if you gave someone a really nice pair of speakers or headphones and a good chain, and you played them, old school MP3 versus playing them a 24-bit 192 stream, they might be able to be like, yeah, that one feels a little, yeah, I can hear that. But at what cost, and at what trade-off, and at what convenience trade-off? I don't know. I think for me, a lot of what better is maybe actually not necessarily like raw technical performance. And this goes back to like measuring a perfectly flat, sine wave versus like what sounds good, what sounds rewarding. Like I have a pair of JBLs that are probably 40 years old that I sold to a friend. They were like refoamed. They're really nice, but I sold them to a friend because I was kind of moving up the chain. And every time I go back to his house and listen to them on his like little Marantz integrated, like it sounds great. It sounds so good. It makes you feel so warm and happy. And it's not nearly as technically proficient as the system in my living room. Also like 1/100th of the cost, but the point is, like, better is a very loaded word, right? And I think that a lot of the stuff that we get interested in this hobby that's outside of mainstream consumer audio gear is not necessarily better in terms of technical capabilities. It's better in terms of like finding that perfect fit. And you can't, I don't know that you can, I think a lot of what you get when you go to Best Buy is the same thing. Like there's sort of like an audio presentation, which is very like sharp treble, bass heavy, that is the 5.1 home theater experience, that is compressed pop music on the radio, that is just a lot of like the modern trends reinforced. And that's like that's my qualm with consumer audio. It's not that it's necessarily like worse in terms of technical prowess. It's just that it's like all being tuned to like deliver this very sellable thing that's sexy and fun and attractive. And, you know, if you want better, as in more personally aligned to your taste profile, then you get more interested in the fringes of audio where you can like carve out that niche listening experience.
Well, for me, I think like what really gets me is when I listen to some stuff and like it's all the little nuances that really sell it, you know? But how much all the nuance in the world doesn't make a lick of difference if you're not paying attention. Right? So maybe, I mean, maybe that's really where it's at, is are you paying attention? And if you are, then you'll pick it up. And if not, then you're probably happy with whatever, you know? So
yeah, but that's your better, right? Like you're like you enjoy like those little twinkly bits,
yeah,
little edges, those little senses of space. Like that's fun for you. I like that stuff too, but also like I really respond to like mid bass and warmth.
It is so tough with that word better. I agree it is loaded. And I think like when we use the word better, we need to be clear about what we are talking about, because like there is this attitude in our hobby that it's not better, it's just different. And on the other token, it's like, no, there are some things that are just flat better, right? Like they are more resolving. They do like all kinds of stuff better. Like they are a more technically accurate, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So then there are some things that, you know, are different. Like you can get relative equals technically that, you know, emphasize things slightly differently. And so then like those aren't necessarily better, but they're just different. But, you know, I understand what you're saying. I just we need to be clear. When are we talking about better gear or better for me?
yeah,
Right?
better
Like
is it
what are we talking about
like
when we
I
do
like it
that?
better.
Yeah.
I like it better. And that's I mean, and I think that's just a shift in perspective too of like how do you review things? Do you review it from like, is it just a purely better thing, or is it, do you just like it better? And I feel like I don't know, a little bit of both, but I feel like I'm leaning more towards the like, I just want to talk about the things I like, you know? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
It's more
Well,
fun to
I
talk
think,
about the things you like.
well, taste is important, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
otherwise a machine could do what we do, right? Which is just like take a thing, analyze it, and say this one's technically better than that one. But like the reason there are multiple people like us in this world listening to things and talking about them is because we have different opinions and we have different taste. And I guess that's maybe the point I was trying to make between like sort of like mass consumer audio and video versus sort of like niche hobbyist, you know, stuff, is like you can walk into Best Buy and drop, you know, $4,000 on an audio system, or you can spend
You
time.
can. I thought they kind of moved away from that,
Well,
but
I guess the
anyway,
Magnolia stuff got wound down. But my point
yeah.
being, like, there's always more money to be spent, right? But like the point is, you can also go and like go to your local like vintage restore and get a pair of this, and you know, get this old turntable, and you know, assemble a system to yourself that may be more expensive, less expensive, but if it's like aligned to what you're into and makes you happy, then cheers. And I think that's my sort of, it's not even meant to be a critique. It's just my sort of experience of more commercial audio gear is that it's very, the tuning is very consistent, and it's consistent to this pattern that sells. And unfortunately, it's the same
Well,
thing that like happened in, you
yes.
know, the volume wars, where it's like all about compression and all about like emphasizing these things that are like at first kind of fun and flashy and attractive, but are fatiguing and are maybe not like as emotionally connected to the music. And so I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit. So
No, that's okay. But I mean, you are correct that like even I have used this term many times, and now that I think about it, I need to go and define it in my audiophile terminology series. But I have described many things as having a mainstream tuning, right? And like that's not inherently good or bad on its own. Like the mainstream tuning can be fine. Let's talk about all of the other stuff, like the resolution and the imaging and all of that kind of stuff. But you are correct that the reason we use a mainstream tuning is the term mainstream. I can't even say it right now. Mainstream tuning. There we go. Is because there is like a fairly narrow range of tunings that you hear at your big box stores. Like I completely agree with you on that. And the one thing I would add to what you say is they do tend to have an elevated bass and an elevated treble. I think they also frequently put a mid-range peak in there to make vocals come forward a little bit too, because most music listeners, at least in the Western world, like to hear the lyrics to the songs that they're listening to as well. So,
well, I meant to pull up next time we do this. I won't tell you where, but I found a really good list of audiophile terms. So next time we meet up, I'll do a flip scroll down the page and throw one at you guys, and we can do some trivia of what that.
I like that idea.
What that term means. So.
Yeah, is that the stereophile glossary?
I won't tell you where I found it. There are probably many of them, but this one's the one I happen to have got a tab open for y'all. So I haven't looked at it too much. I thought it'd be fun to just do the dramatic scroll and then see where we land and see if we can parse it out.
Yeah. We gotta. Cool. I know you guys got to get going to some stuff. So do we want to do some closing? What do we? How do we want to close this out? Just thank everybody. Wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Or what do you guys think?
Happy holidays, Happy New Year. It's good stuff. I mean, keep listening to music you love.
Pursue your better in 2023.
Your better.
Whatever that may be.
If you haven't yet, figure out what your better means and then pursue it.
I think that's sage advice. I think we probably come back to that a lot, right? It's like, don't be afraid to have your own taste and try to figure out what it is. Like, MrAyrit said, like, get three of the same thing and pick the one you love. And what Wave Theory said, it's like, try to be thoughtful about what you're hearing. And if it's driving with you, and, find your thing and then don't be apologetic about it, but live that, buy that, optimize for that, and build a system that makes you happy and makes you want to sink into your chair and not listen to the really sweet hi-fi man senior that just got sent to you.
All right, fellas. Well, it's been great that we finally were able to get
not
back
that
to
I'm
it.
jealous.
Yeah. What's amazing is, I'm not going to say it, there is a video where I have what you just said over one of my shoulders. It's a recent video. No one has commented that they've seen it yet. And I wonder if that's just because no one really knows what it looks like.
I wouldn't know.
Okay. All right.
Stay tuned and you'll find out.
I don't know if I can call that one a review, because I don't know what something on that level is even supposed to sound like, other than better than everything you've heard before.
It better be better.
And I mean actually better, not just better for me. I mean like really actually better.
Yeah. All right. Pass you up my number. All right. Well, you guys have a great holidays. Happy New Year.
Too.
Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Peace.